Hello everyone, this is Amy with the Nortonville Library and Museum, and today we're going to start a new series covering the town founders and early influential figures in southern Hopkins County. So this started out as one really long video, but it's been a bit unwieldy to edit for me, and it might be a little long for you all to watch, so we're going to separate it by towns. And of course we're going to start with Nortonville because that's where we are, and then we'll go on from there. I'm hoping I can separate this into 3 different videos, but we'll see how it goes with the editing. So I hope you enjoy, and let's get started. Now, the first person we're going to be talking about today is a gentleman named Eckstein Norton, who happens to be who the town of Nortonville was named after. X, as he was often called, X Norton, is a Kentucky native who rose through the ranks of the Gilded Age elite and became a successful business owner, banker, financier, and L&N Railroad president. Eckstein Norton was born in Russellville, Kentucky in 1831. His parents were William and Mary Heiss Norton. His father, William, first came to Kentucky from Pennsylvania in 1806. William may have worked as a blacksmith, where he first learned to make high-quality nails, which he became locally famous for. Later, he opened his own general store in Russellville that featured these locally famous nails and other hardware and dry food items. X and his brothers started working in their dad's store as soon as they could reach the counters. While his father was a successful business owner, X Norton's mother was just as hardworking and industrious. In fact, according to family lore, Mary's sons all inherited their energy and great financial skills from her. Mary was also known to be very artistic and creative. The quilt shown here was created by Mary in the early to mid-1800s. It is so detailed and well formed that it has won multiple prizes across Kentucky. In 1981, one of Mary Heiss Norton's great-great-granddaughters donated this quilt to the Smithsonian, where it was then transferred to the National Museum of American History, where it is still located today, though it is not currently on display. In 1854, when X was 24, he moved to Cairo, Illinois, and accepted his job as a forwarding receiving agent on the Ohio and Mississippi rivers, where he forwarded freight for the Illinois Central Railroad. In 1857, at age 26, he and his brother, William F. Norton, established a very successful bank in Paducah, Kentucky. In 1864, in the midst of the Civil War, Eckstein Norton moved to New York City to try his hand at banking in the big city. Upon his arrival, he established the bank of Norton, Slaughter & Company. Norton had the unique insight to see how important and crucial the railroads were becoming to the U.S. economy, so he set up this new bank to have a special focus on railroads. Norton then reorganized the New Orleans and Ohio Railroad in 1870 and consolidated it with the Mississippi Railroad, creating the Paducah and Memphis Railroad. He worked with this railroad until 1881. Sometime in the late 1860s or very early 1870s, after overseeing the laying of the tracks for the Elizabethtown and Paducah Railroad in western Kentucky, Eckstein Norton purchased 2,000 acres of land in southern Hopkins County. Norton likely saw great potential in the area and was hoping a prosperous town and industries could be built at the site. Soon after the purchase, a train station, hotel, and post office were built on Norton's property. This new settlement became known as Nortonville. In the early 1880s, the Louisville and Nashville Railroad, or L&N, was experiencing a lot of financial difficulty and facing bankruptcy, so Norton offered to work on the board of directors. They accepted this offer in 1884. At the time, the L&N Railroad had over 4,000 miles of tracks in 8 states, and the company oversaw one of the most vital transportation arteries in the United States. From 1884 till 1891, Eckstein Norton was greatly involved in the L&N Railroad and its transformation back into a profitable, dividend-paying company. He did such a great job that they elected him president of the L&N in 1887. Within 3 years of his taking over, their net earnings were over $6 million, an outrageous sum at the time. Before leaving Kentucky on August 30th, 1864, Eckstein Norton married Lucy Moore of Hopkinsville. The pair had 6 children: Elizabeth, William Presley, Lucy Moore, Eckstein Jr., Mary Heiss, and George Frederick. The Norton family owned homes at 811 Fifth Avenue near 62nd Street and Central Park in Manhattan, and also owned a, quote, country home on Staten Island. During his life, Norton was often referred to in newspapers and by friends as being both generous and genial. Quote, Mr. Norton is genial and hospitable, and a royal welcome and entertainment is always extended to his friends at their home on Fifth Avenue by himself and his estimable wife. He was known also to give freely to charity. He gave a great deal through his church, but he also gave to school and colleges and lots of infirmaries and hospitals. He was also deeply involved in improving his neighborhood in Staten Island and also in improving his hometown of Russellville, Kentucky. The Norton family's Manhattan home was located on prestigious Fifth Avenue, just across from Central Park. Often referred to as Millionaire's Row, only the wealthiest New Yorkers lived at this address in the late 19th century, and it's still considered one of the most expensive streets to live on in the world. It's also still famous for high-end shopping. At the time, the Central Park Zoo and Pond would have been just across the street from the Norton home. In 1891, Eckstein Norton gave up the L&M presidency to focus more on his family and other interests. The job put a lot of stress and strain on him, so his family and friends were anxious for him to take things slower, but he was determined to stay with the job until he got the L&N out of financial danger. Sadly, Eckstein Norton died of heart disease at his Staten Island home on January 2, 1893, just 2 years after resigning the presidency. The top leaders at the L&N Railroad accompanied his body back home to Russellville, Kentucky for burial. Although X. Norton never actually lived here in Nortonville, he undoubtedly made several trips through the town on his inspection of all the L&N stations on the Henderson Division. Good judgment, insight, and being fully informed of all details on a venture were hallmarks of his success. And any town on the L&N line, including many small towns here in western Kentucky, profited from his successes. When Norton passed away, the Louisville Courier-Journal was quoted as saying, Norton was one of the ablest financiers Kentucky has ever sent to the metropolis. In an interesting historical note, Eckstein Norton's youngest daughter, Mary Heiss Norton, married Henry E. Loney in 1897. The lavish ceremony at St. John's Episcopal Church was reported as the largest and grandest wedding that year on New York's Staten Island. The ceremony was even attended by Mr. and Mrs. Andrew Carnegie and other influential members of the New York's high society. For a year and a half, the couple lived happily in New York City with a summer home in upstate New York near the Roosevelts, but then had to move to Asheville, North Carolina for Mary's health. She had lost a child, and it is believed that she perhaps contracted tuberculosis. Sadly, Mary died on March 17, 1900, and was buried in a grand tomb, pictured here, in upstate New York. In 1934, she and her child were moved and reinterred on Staten Island. This, her grand tomb, it still stands, but is now empty. In a second historical note, Eckstein Norton's youngest son, George Frederick Norton, also had a short but interesting life. Frederick was known as an adventurer, photographer, hunter, and traveler. In 1908, George Frederick used money inherited upon his father's death to help fund Admiral Robert Peary's final trek to the Arctic in 1908 and 1909. Frederick even took part in the expedition and traveled with Peary and his group as far north as Greenland. He also collected items like kayaks, harpoons, and sealskins from the expedition, and donated them to the Smithsonian. Here are some rare photographs Frederick took while on the expedition. Like Ernest Hemingway and Walt Disney, Frederick Norton also volunteered to be an ambulance driver in France in the spring of 1917. Sadly, Frederick Norton would not be as lucky as Hemingway and Disney, and Frederick died when his ambulance was struck by a bomb fragment from a German airplane on July 13, 1917. He was initially buried near Reims, not far from the site where he was killed, near the Chateau Ramont, but he was later reinterred on Staten Island, New York. Another individual who was important to the history of Nortonville was Sterling Lanier Jr. Sterling Lanier was born on September 23, 1888, in Birmingham, Alabama. He was the son of Sterling Sidney Lanier and Mary Louise Bannister Lanier. Lanier grew up in Alabama and after graduating Lehigh University, worked at several mining-related businesses in that state. In January 1911, Sterling Lanier Jr. came to Nortonville for the first time and worked as general superintendent of the Nortonville mine. After a year, his father, Sterling Lanier Sr., decided to buy the Nortonville Coal and Coke Company, changing the name to the Norton Coal Mining Company. In 1912, he named his son as general manager and designated Robert L. Schlottman as assistant manager and purchasing agent. Schlottman would hold this position from 1912 until 1952 when he retired. When Sterling Lanier Sr. died in 1917, his eldest son Monroe was named as president of the Norton Coal Mining Company, and Sterling became vice president. When his brother moved on to other ventures, Sterling Lanier became president. In 1925, the Lanier brothers organized the Kentucky Electric Power Corporation and built a power plant, as you see pictured here, next to Nortonville's number 1 mine. Sterling Lanier married Elizabeth Wilkinson in June 1916 and had 3 children, Russell, Ann, and Reginald. The family spent most of their early years here in Nortonville. Later, they built a nice home at 2117 South Main Street in Hopkinsville. Throughout his life, Sterling Lanier Jr. loved art and painting. Prior to the start of the community college in Hopkinsville, Lanier started an art class in the town. He also was the driving force behind the creation of the Hopkinsville Art Guild, which still exists today. Sterling Lanier Jr. stayed connected to Nortonville by business ties and by his affection for the town. He and the Norton Coal Company gave land for schools, and he was even honored with a plaque at the Nortonville Centennial Celebration in 1972 for his years of service to the community. Now, in fairness, one's view of Sterling Lanier might be colored by whether you were a pro-union or anti-union household at the time. Mr. Lanier clashed with the UMWA on multiple occasions, so there were many that were not big fans of the gentleman. But some argue that Nortonville's most prosperous years came as a result of Sterling Lanier's hard work and dedication. Although the name would be applied to others over the years, Sterling Lanier was truly the original Mr. Nortonville. In an interesting side note, Monroe Lanier, Sterling's elder brother, was the second president of the Norton Coal Mining Company. This is Monroe's passport information and photo from a trip he made to Brazil in the 1940s. In addition to the years Monroe spent in Nortonville, he and his brother also spent time building and cultivating mining interests in both Cuba and South America. In an interesting historical note, Sterling Lanier had 2 famous relatives. First, Lanier's great-uncle, Sterling C. Lanier, ran several large, luxurious hotels in the South just prior to the Civil War. These hotels included the Lanier House in Macon, Georgia, the Exchange Hotel in Montgomery, Alabama, Montvale Springs Resort in Tennessee, and the Lamar House in Knoxville, Tennessee. Sterling Lanier's other famous relative was his second cousin, Sidney C. Lanier. He was a well-known Southern poet, writer, and musician. He fought for the Confederacy during the Civil War and died in 1881 of tuberculosis that he had contracted at a Maryland prison camp. He's best known for his poems, The Marshes of Glen and The Song of the Chattahoochee. Well, that's it for today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it. And this is by no means a comprehensive list of those that influenced or had a huge impact on each of these communities. If you have someone that you think deserves to be on this list, please comment below when this video is posted on Facebook. If we revisit the series in the future, we may include your suggestion. But again, that's it for now. Please join us next time as we explore influential folks from the community of Barnsley, Earlington, and Morton's Gap. We'll see you then.